82 million years ago, the planet Earth was a water world bathed in the relentless heat of a greenhouse climate. The continents, still drifting slowly toward their modern positions, were fractured and drowned by sea levels nearly 200 meters higher than those of our current era. Imagine a world with absolutely no polar ice caps, where dense forests stretch to the coastlines of Antarctica, and where oceans absorbed the intense warmth of a sun beating down through an atmosphere incredibly rich in carbon dioxide. In this ancient epoch, the Late Cretaceous period, the boundaries between land and sea were constantly shifting, creating vast, shallow continental shelves that acted as perfect crucibles for biological innovation. The waters were vibrant, teeming with strange and magnificent forms of life, refining their survival strategies over eons of unbroken evolutionary history. If you could stand on the shoreline of what is now the Midwestern United States, you would not see sweeping plains of grass, but rather the gentle rhythmic lapping of waves from the western interior seaway, a massive body of shallow water that bisected the North American continent from the Gulf of Mexico all the way to the freezing darkness of the Arctic Ocean. The air would be heavy, thick with humidity and the metallic tang of salt, carrying the cries of giant pterosaurs riding thermal updrafts. It was an ecosystem of unprecedented abundance and unparalleled danger, a liquid universe where size and speed dictated the fundamental laws of existence. Before we sink beneath the surface of this ancient sea to witness the reign of its absolute monarch, take a brief moment to adjust to the dimming light. Breathe in deeply, hold it for a moment, and release the tension of the modern world. I am Frank, the archaeologist, and I will be your guide through this submerged history. I noticed that roughly 71.9% of the people who watch these deep dives into our planet's past have not yet subscribed to the channel. If you find peace and wonder in these stories, please consider subscribing. It truly helps a lot to keep bringing these lost worlds back to life. Now, let the noise of your modern day completely fade away, and let us breathe in the ancient salt air as we prepare to step backward through the vast corridors of deep time. The story of how we know about the Mosasaurus is a foundational chapter in human scientific understanding. It is a remarkable tale that bridges local folklore and rigorous empirical evidence, ultimately shifting our philosophical perspective on the permanence of life on Earth. Long before we mapped the genetic codes of living animals or sent automated probes to the silent edges of our solar system, humanity was struggling to comprehend the strange rocks pulled from the deep Earth. In the year 1764, in the subterranean chalk quarries near the city of Maastricht in the Netherlands, local miners struck something hard and entirely anomalous. Buried deep within the soft white limestone, a sedimentary rock formed from the accumulated calcium carbonate shells of trillions of microscopic marine organisms over millions of years. They uncovered a massive fossilized skull. It was a terrifying object, equipped with conical, incredibly robust teeth that hinted at a life of violent predation. Initially, local scholars and theologians were completely baffled. Some proposed it was the remains of a monstrous crocodile washed up by the biblical flood. Others speculated it was a giant unknown species of toothed whale. The concept that a creature could completely vanish from the face of the earth, that entire species could be extinguished by the ruthless march of geological time, was considered scientifically and philosophically heretical at the time. The world was widely believed to be a static creation, perfect and unchanging since its inception. But this enormous skull, pulled from the chalky grave of the Cretaceous Sea, demanded a completely different explanation. It eventually caught the attention of the brilliant French anatomist Georges Cuvier in the early years of the 19th century. By meticulously comparing the fossilized bones with the skeletal structures of living reptiles, Cuvier made a radical and irrefutable pronouncement. This skull did not belong to any animal currently walking, swimming, or flying on the face of the earth. It was an extinct marine reptile, closely related to modern monitor lizards and snakes, which he later named Mosasaurus, meaning the reptile of the Meuse River. This monumental discovery did far more than identify a new prehistoric beast. It proved the reality of biological extinction. It proved that our Earth possessed a deep, unimaginably violent history, a rolling theater where entire dynasties rose to absolute power only to be erased by the contingencies of time and environmental transformation. This intellectual awakening allows us tonight to accurately reconstruct the sovereign domain of this magnificent creature without relying on myth or fantasy. The late Cretaceous ocean was not merely a passive backdrop for the Mosasaurus. It was the dynamic engine of its evolution, a fiercely competitive environment that forced adaptation at a spectacular pace. To truly understand the monarch, we must deeply understand its kingdom. The shallow inland seas, such as the Great Western Interior Seaway, were entirely unlike the deep, cold abysses of the modern Pacific or Atlantic Oceans. Resting securely on submerged continental crust, these waters were relatively shallow, often plunging no deeper than 200 to 300 meters. Sunlight penetrated easily through the clear water column, illuminating the pale seabed and driving an explosion of photosynthetic phytoplankton. This incredible primary productivity formed the foundation of a complex food web that supported an astonishing volume of biomass. The coastal waters were clouded with nutrients, feeding massive schools of iridescent fish. Some were small and darting, flashing like silver coins in the sunlight, while others, like the terrifying predatory fish known as Xiphactinus, grew to astounding lengths of up to 6 meters, armed with faces that resembled nightmare bulldogs with jagged, interlocking fangs. The ocean floor was literally carpeted with giant bivalves, some measuring over a full meter across, their incredibly heavy corrugated shells offering a desperate defense against the crushing jaws of specialized predators. Ammonites, the iconic shelled cephalopods related to our modern squid and octopuses, drifted through the water column in uncountable billions. Their coiled, mathematically perfect shells ranged from tiny spiral jewels to massive structures the size of tractor tires. They bobbed slowly through warm currents, hunting for small prey while simultaneously avoiding the ominous shadows that passed silently overhead. And passing overhead were the ruling reptiles. The Mosasaurus did not suddenly appear in this vibrant ocean fully formed and ready to conquer. Its evolutionary lineage tells a remarkable story of adaptation and reversal, a profound testament to the fluid and opportunistic nature of life on Earth. Tens of millions of years earlier, during the Jurassic and early Cretaceous periods, the ancestors of the mosasaurs were small, semi-aquatic lizards scurrying along rocky coastlines, hunting insects and small fish in shallow tide pools. As global temperatures inexorably rose and oceans expanded, flooding continents and creating vast new aquatic territories, these terrestrial lizards began a deliberate return to the water. Generation after generation, the uncompromising logic of natural selection favored individuals who could swim slightly faster, hold their breath slightly longer, and capture prey more efficiently in the submerged world. Over eons, their legs gradually transformed into hydrofoil-like flippers, losing their toes and claws in favor of smooth, fleshy paddles. Their tails lengthened and deepened, developing a muscular fluke that propelled them through the water with the hypnotic grace of a serpent. Their bodies became perfectly streamlined, shedding all terrestrial evolutionary baggage to achieve absolute hydrodynamic perfection. This monumental transition was a biological imperative driven by the sheer abundance of food waiting in the shallow seas and the intense, unforgiving competition on land. By the time the Maastrichtian Age dawned, roughly 72 million years ago, the transformation was complete. The descendants of those small lizards had grown into colossal leviathans, with some species reaching lengths of over 15 meters and weighing as much as 15 tons. They had become the undisputed apex predators of their era, filling an ecological niche that would one day be claimed by killer whales and great white sharks. But they were neither mammal nor fish. They were reptiles of the highest order, breathing the same atmospheric air as the giant dinosaurs on land, yet perfectly adapted to a life of perpetual swimming. To share the water with a Mosasaurus was to exist in a permanent state of electric vigilance. Imagine, if you will, the sensory reality of this ancient ocean. The water was remarkably warm, perhaps averaging 24 to 28 degrees Celsius, even in temperate latitudes, creating a vast thermal blanket that allowed these cold-blooded marine reptiles to maintain high levels of sustained activity, without the immense metabolic cost of generating internal body heat. This environmental warmth was absolutely crucial to their dominance. It meant mosasaurs could grow to gargantuan sizes and still possess the explosive speed necessary to ambush fast-moving prey. Sound traveled completely differently in this dense medium. The sharp clicks of massive fish, the crushing of ammonite shells, the deep rumbles of shifting tectonic plates beneath the ocean floor, all these vibrations would have been instantly picked up by the highly sensitive auditory structures of the marine predators. While the Mosasaurus lacked external ears, it possessed a refined internal auditory system capable of detecting the chaotic thrashing of a wounded animal from kilometers away. Its vision was equally specialized, exquisitely adapted to the bright, sun-dappled upper layers of the ocean. Large, forward-facing eyes provided overlapping fields of view, granting the creature stereoscopic vision and extremely precise depth perception, a terrifying advantage when calculating the exact fraction of a second to strike. But perhaps its most fascinating sensory adaptation was a direct legacy of its terrestrial ancestors, a highly developed Jacobson's organ located in the roof of its massive mouth. Even underwater, the Mosasaurus could flick its long, forked tongue into the current, catching suspended chemical particles, and then draw it back to analyze the molecular signature of its environment. It could literally taste the fear, the blood, and the biological trail of its prey dissolving in the salty vastness. It was a predator that tracked not just by sight and sound, but by the invisible chemical ghosts left behind in the water column. As the sun slowly sank below the western horizon of the Late Cretaceous, painting the sky in bruised shades of deep purple and burning orange, the shallow seas transformed. The darkness brought a completely different kind of tension to the water. Bound forever by their need to breathe atmospheric oxygen, the giant reptiles could not hide in abyssal depths like modern squid. They cruised the upper waters, their massive silhouettes occasionally breaking the surface under the silver light of a moon that looked slightly larger and closer than the one in our night sky. The rhythm of their breathing, a sudden exhalation of stale air followed immediately by a deep, hollow inhalation, was often the only sound disrupting the gentle lapping of waves against the shore. It is a profoundly peaceful image, but it heavily belies the lethal reality of their daily existence. This was a beautiful, sun-drenched slaughterhouse where only the most perfectly adapted could ever hope to survive the night. The continents continued their imperceptibly slow drift across the globe. The climate slowly fluctuated over hundreds of thousands of years, and the great mosasaurs reigned supreme, entirely unaware that their dominance was completely contingent on the stability of a world that was quietly preparing to end. They were not evolutionary dead ends waiting to be replaced. They were absolute masterpieces of biological engineering, exquisitely tuned to an environment that felt eternal. As we prepare to follow one specific creature through its daily struggle for survival in our next chapter, allow your mind to drift gently on these ancient currents. Feel the heavy weight of the water, the gentle rocking of the continental tide, the immense comforting span of geological time that carefully separates our modern world from theirs. The past is not just a collection of dusty bones buried in silent stone. It is a continuously flowing river of moments, and tonight we are merely pausing to swim in a different part of the stream. Breathe in the ancient air. Let the darkness of the Cretaceous ocean wash over you and surrender completely to the vast, quiet depths of history. The morning light strikes the surface of the western interior seaway, not as a gentle illumination, but as a brilliant, piercing barrage of photons penetrating the heavily saturated atmosphere of the Late Cretaceous period. It is approximately 75 million years before the present day. Beneath the rhythmic undulations of the waves, the light fractures into a mesmerizing, shifting kaleidoscope of shimmering geometric patterns that dance across the pale, chalky seabed. This is a three-dimensional universe governed entirely by fluid dynamics, a world where gravity is suspended by the grace of buoyancy, and where every movement is an intricate negotiation with the dense, unyielding medium of salt water. Suspended perfectly in this golden, sun-dappled midwater column is a creature of almost incomprehensible majesty and terror. It is a mature Tylosaurus, one of the most formidable and spectacularly adapted mosasaurs to ever patrol these shallow continental seas. Measuring nearly 14 meters from the blunt, battering ram tip of its heavily armored snout to the final vertebra of its vertically flattened tail fluke, the animal is a masterpiece of evolutionary engineering. Its body is encased in a tight matrix of small, overlapping, diamond-shaped scales, dark gray and mottled black across its muscular back to blend seamlessly with the abyssal depths when viewed from above, and pale silver along its sweeping belly to vanish against the sunlit surface when stalked from below. This is countershading, an ancient and ruthlessly effective optical illusion that renders a 15-ton leviathan effectively invisible in the open ocean. Every aspect of its anatomy is stripped of terrestrial inefficiency. Its lungs are massive, capable of storing enough atmospheric oxygen to sustain highly energetic hunting dives for agonizingly long stretches of time. It moves with a hypnotic, undulating grace, swinging its heavy, elongated skull from side to side in a slow, rhythmic sweep, analyzing the chemical and vibratory signature of millions of cubic liters of seawater. As we drift silently alongside this magnificent, terrifying predator, suspended in the warm embrace of the Cretaceous Sea, I want to take a brief, quiet moment to speak directly to you. I am Frank, the archaeologist, and I am deeply honored to be your guide on these meditative journeys into the abysses of deep time. I check the statistics for these expeditions, and I've noticed that exactly 71.9% of the people who watch and drift away to these stories have not yet subscribed to the channel. If you find comfort, curiosity, and peace in these reconstructions of lost worlds, please consider subscribing. It helps enormously, allowing us to continue breathing life into these forgotten epochs and bringing these quiet, ancient spaces directly to you. Now, let us return to the suspended silence of the inland sea, breathing slowly and deeply, matching the measured, powerful rhythm of the Leviathan swimming beside us. The Tylosaurus does not swim with the frantic, energy-wasting movements of a panicked fish. It conserves its vast reserves of metabolic energy through a highly efficient method of locomotion known as chorangiform swimming. The front two-thirds of its immense cylindrical body remain rigidly stable, a biological torpedo cutting through the water with minimal hydrodynamic drag, while the powerful muscular rear section and the crescent-shaped tail fluke generate massive thrust through sweeping lateral undulations. Its four flippers, the evolutionary remnants of the legs that its distant ancestors once used to scurry across sun-baked terrestrial rocks, are now strictly used for incredibly precise steering and stabilization, acting as hydrofoils that pitch and roll its massive bulk with the delicate grace of a soaring bird adjusting to a thermal updraft. Within the mind of the mosasaur, the world is constructed through a symphony of overlapping sensory inputs. The lateral line system, a network of highly sensitive mechanoreceptors running along the length of its flanks, detects the faintest pressure changes in the surrounding water. The erratic thrashing of a wounded fish, the rhythmic pulse of a distant plesiosaur, the subtle displacement of water caused by a massive school of squid. All of these distant events paint a highly detailed, three-dimensional topographic map of the surrounding environment directly into the predator's ancient brain. It does not need to see its prey to know exactly where it is, how large it is, and exactly how fast it is moving. The biological mechanics of a mosasaur's bite reveal the terrifying ingenuity of natural selection over millions of years. Unlike modern crocodiles, which rely on immense crushing pressure generated by highly robust jaw muscles, the skull of the Tylosaurus is kinetically highly flexible. It is composed of multiple independent bony segments connected by flexible ligaments, allowing the jaw to expand outward and swallow extremely large prey entirely whole, much like a modern serpent. But the true horror of its anatomy lies hidden within the dark cavern of its mouth. Just behind the primary rows of thick, conical, incredibly sharp teeth that line its powerful jaws, there exists a secondary set of teeth embedded directly into the roof of its mouth, known as pterygoid teeth. When the mosasaur launches its ambush, it does not merely bite its victim. It clamps down with the primary jaws, securing the struggling prey, and then, in a horrifyingly efficient mechanical sequence, it uses a ratchet-like motion of the upper and lower jaws, combined with those recurved pterygoid teeth, to pull the still-living animal backward directly down its muscular throat. There is absolutely no chance of escape once the initial connection is made. The entire anatomical apparatus is perfectly designed to ensure a one-way journey into the digestive abyss. It is a violent, uncompromising reality of life in the Cretaceous ocean. Yet, when viewed from the detached perspective of geological time, it is merely the transfer of energy from one beautifully complex biological vessel to another, maintaining the intricate mathematical balance of the entire marine ecosystem. We watch as the great predator suddenly alters its behavior. The slow, sweeping movements of its head stop entirely. The long, forked tongue flicks out into the salty water, tasting a specific chemical gradient, a faint plume of biological detritus drifting on the warm currents. It has locked onto a target. The target is a large, heavily armored sea turtle, paddling lazily near the surface to bask in the intense, ultraviolet radiation of the late Cretaceous sun. The turtle is a formidable survivor in its own right, encased in a thick shell of solid bone that offers formidable protection against smaller predators, but it is completely unaware of the shadow rising from the depths directly beneath it. The Tylosaurus calculates the trajectory, the distance, and the required acceleration with the flawless instinctual geometry of a creature perfectly adapted to its reality. It angles its massive head upward and initiates the strike. The powerful tail fluke sweeps in a massive, violent arc, displacing hundreds of liters of water in a single heartbeat. The acceleration is explosive, an instantaneous conversion of stored metabolic energy into raw, devastating kinetic power. The 15-ton animal becomes a blurred missile of dark muscle and bone, rocketing toward the sunlit surface. The impact is catastrophic. The heavy battering ram snout of the mosasaur slams into the underside of the sea turtle, shattering its heavily armored shell with the concussive force of a localized explosion. The water instantly clouds with a chaotic mixture of fragmented bone, torn tissue, and brilliant crimson blood that slowly diffuses into a pale pink mist. The pterygoid teeth engage, the flexible jaws expand, and the struggle is concluded almost before the ripples of the impact can spread across the glassy surface of the inland sea. It is profoundly easy for the human mind to overlay this scene with emotions of cruelty, malice, or tragedy. Our deeply ingrained anthropocentrism demands a moral narrative, a story of heroes and villains, of innocence completely violated by monstrosity. But the ocean is completely devoid of morality. The mosasaur feels no hatred for the turtle. It only feels the absolute biological imperative to sustain its own massive cellular structure. The universe does not judge the transfer of carbon and oxygen from one organism to another. It simply allows the physical laws of thermodynamics to play out across the vast theater of existence. Recognizing this profound indifference is not a cause for existential despair, but rather a deeply liberating philosophical revelation. We are momentarily freed from the heavy, artificial burdens of human narrative. We are allowed to simply observe the raw, unfiltered mechanics of nature, operating at the absolute peak of its complexity. The remains of the meal that the mosasaur does not consume begin their slow, incredibly quiet descent toward the pale, chalky seabed hundreds of meters below. As these fragments drift downward, spinning lazily through shafts of golden light, they are entering the very first stages of fossilization. Over millions of years, they will be buried by countless microscopic shells, compressed by the unimaginable weight of shifting oceans, and eventually uplifted by tectonic forces to become the dry, dusty limestone cliffs of our modern continents. The calcium that forms those ancient bones is the exact same elemental calcium that currently structuralizes your own human skeleton. We are not separated from this ancient, violent, beautiful world. We are directly composed of its recycled remnants. As the sun begins its slow descent toward the western horizon, the temperature of the air drops slightly, and the relentless glare on the water softens into a warm, mesmerizing expanse of liquid copper. The great Tylosaurus, its metabolic furnace temporarily satiated, slows its immense body. It rises gently to the surface, exhaling a massive plume of warm, moist air that hangs momentarily over the water before dissolving into the wind, and draws in a deep, fresh breath of the Cretaceous atmosphere. It then angles its massive head downward and initiates a slow, deliberate glide back into the comforting twilight depths of the inland sea. Let your own breathing synchronize completely with the slow, rhythmic movements of this ancient leviathan. Inhale deeply, feeling the cool air fill your modern lungs. Exhale slowly, releasing any remaining tension from your muscles, letting the rigid demands of your daily life dissolve into the warm, salty currents of the past. Imagine the quiet darkness of the water surrounding you, a heavy, silent blanket that insulates you from the frantic noise of the present. The Mosasaurs ruled their world for millions upon millions of years, completely unbothered by the anxieties of the future or the regrets of the past. They existed entirely in the profound electric reality of the present moment. Allow yourself to slip into that same state of pure, detached existence. Let the vastness of geological time wrap around your consciousness, gently dismantling the urgency of your own small human worries. The ancient ocean is calm now. The waves lap softly against the distant shores of a continent that no longer exists. The stars, positioned in unrecognizable constellations, begin to pierce the darkening sky, shining their cold light upon a world that is perfectly balanced, infinitely complex, and deeply at peace. Rest your mind in this quiet abyss, suspended in the safety of deep time, where nothing is demanded of you and everything is exactly as it should be. The quiet that follows the setting of the sun over the western interior seaway is absolute and profound. It is a silence measured not in hours or days, but in millions of years of undisturbed oceanic rhythm. The currents continue to flow, driven by the massive thermal engines of a hothouse Earth, circulating warmth and life from the equator to the very edges of the darkened poles. Beneath the surface, the nocturnal inhabitants of the Cretaceous reef begin to emerge, strange and delicate forms that hide from the brilliant daylight and the sharp eyes of the apex predators. But the great Tylosaurus rests, its massive body gliding effortlessly through the black water, guided purely by instinct and the subtle vibrations of a world it entirely dominates. As you lie here, safe and warm in your own space, let the image of this magnificent creature fade into the gentle darkness of your mind. You are crossing the boundary between the waking world and the ancient dreamlike depths of deep time. There is nothing left to solve tonight, no questions that require immediate answers, no tasks that cannot wait until the sun rises again. Just the slow, steady rhythm of the breath, the comforting weight of gravity, and the peaceful, endless expanse of the ancient sea. Drift peacefully. Let go completely. The ocean of the past is vast, and it is holding you securely in its timeless embrace. To truly grasp the breathtaking magnitude of the late Cretaceous ocean, we must temporarily divert our human attention away from the massive 15-ton apex predators and focus entirely on the microscopic biological foundations of their watery universe. 80 million years ago, the global climate was locked in a profound, inescapable hothouse state, completely and utterly devoid of polar ice caps. The oceans were heavily swollen, expanding across the continental shelves to create shallow, sun-drenched marine environments that functioned as the most productive biological factories the planet had ever seen. During the long, blisteringly hot days of the Cretaceous summer, the surface waters of the Tethys Ocean and the great western interior seaway would erupt in massive continent-spanning phytoplankton blooms. Billions upon trillions of microscopic single-celled algae known as coccolithophores would rapidly multiply, transforming the clear azure waters into a milky, translucent turquoise that stretched continuously for thousands of kilometers. These unimaginable swarms of microscopic life were actively pulling immense quantities of carbon dioxide directly out of the heavy toxic atmosphere, using the intense solar radiation to build intricate microscopic shields of pure calcium carbonate around their delicate single cells. When these organisms inevitably completed their ephemeral life cycles and died, their microscopic shells rained down through the dark water column in a continuous silent snowfall of marine snow, accumulating on the seabed over millions of years to form the vast white chalk cliffs that now majestically define modern coastlines in regions like Dover in England and Normandy in France. Every single movement of a colossal mosasaur, every explosive burst of predatory acceleration, and every highly calculated ambush was ultimately powered by this silent, microscopic alchemy occurring relentlessly at the very surface of their world. Before we follow the gentle, hypnotic descent of this marine snow into the deeper, significantly cooler zones of the ancient Cretaceous Sea, I want to take a brief, quiet moment to connect with you directly. I am Frank, the archaeologist, and I am continually humbled to be your personal guide on these deep temporal expeditions into the buried past. Looking at the analytical data, I have noticed that exactly 71.9% of the people who watch these videos and comfortably allow themselves to drift away into the ancient eras have not yet subscribed to the channel. If you genuinely find true relaxation, intellectual peace, and a sense of cosmic wonder in these contemplative journeys, please consider subscribing. It helps our small community grow immensely and allows me to continue meticulously uncovering these forgotten epochs for you. Now, let us return to the rhythmic oceanic breathing of a world completely untroubled by the frantic pace of the modern age. The precise scientific understanding of this specific hothouse climate does not come from mere human imagination or wild speculation, but from the rigorous, hyperspecific discipline of paleoclimatology. How do we know, with such absolute, unwavering certainty, that the waters were warm enough to support giant, cold-blooded reptiles swimming effortlessly near the Arctic Circle? The profound answer lies hidden within the microscopic chemical signatures, trapped forever within the very chalk we just observed. Dedicated scientists painstakingly examine the fossilized remains of tiny, amoeba-like marine organisms called foraminifera, which also construct complex calcium carbonate shells to protect themselves. By carefully vaporizing these incredibly tiny fossils in advanced mass spectrometers, brilliant researchers can measure the exact specific ratio of two different isotopes of oxygen, oxygen-16 and oxygen-18, that are locked permanently within the ancient calcium matrix. Because water containing the lighter oxygen-16 evaporates slightly more easily under intense heat, and because the total global ice volume drastically affects how much of each specific isotope is left behind in the global ocean, this atomic ratio acts as an incredibly precise 80-million-year-old thermometer. These invisible atomic archives definitively tell us that the deep ocean temperatures during the absolute peak reign of the Mosasaurus were up to 15 degrees Celsius warmer than they are today. This was a planet running a massive, sustained global thermal fever, an environment where the brutal thermodynamics of survival overwhelmingly favored massive cold-blooded reptiles that could efficiently absorb the ambient heat without expending their precious metabolic energy to keep their massive bodies warm. This fundamental thermal reality allowed the mosasaurs to completely bypass the physiological constraints that strictly limit the maximum size of modern marine reptiles, pushing their biological architecture to extreme, almost unbelievable dimensions. As we glide further out into the open, turbulent waters of the Proto-Atlantic Ocean, a newly opening tectonic rift that was literally unzipping the ancient supercontinent of Pangaea apart at the seams, we directly witnessed the sheer relentless power of the Cretaceous weather systems. The immense, unimaginable thermal energy stored within the swollen, superheated oceans acted as an incredibly powerful engine for violent atmospheric turbulence. During the late summer months, as sea surface temperatures reached their absolute peak, colossal cyclonic storms would frequently and spontaneously form. These were not the standard hurricanes of our modern era. These were hypercanes, massive rotating vortexes of apocalyptic wind and rain, fueled by waters far hotter than any tropical ocean existing today. Imagine, if you will, a storm system spanning thousands of kilometers across, with sustained shrieking winds comfortably exceeding 300 kilometers per hour, ripping across the shallow seaway with a fury that defies modern meteorological comprehension. The atmospheric barometric pressure drops precipitously, causing the very air to feel dangerously thin. The sky, normally a hazy, carbon-heavy blue, bruises rapidly into a terrifying canopy of deep purple and charcoal gray. The surface of the ocean is whipped into a chaotic, terrifying frenzy of towering, frothing swells, some reaching horrifying heights of 20 meters, crashing wildly against each other in an explosive, deafening display of raw, undirected kinetic energy. Yet, as terrifying as this atmospheric violence appears to our human sensibilities, the ocean itself remains fundamentally indifferent, merely facilitating the massive transfer of energy from the hot equator to the cooler poles. But for the supreme marine masters of this world, the hypercane is not a catastrophic, life-ending disaster. It is merely a temporary shift in the physical fluid dynamics of their environment. As the barometric pressure drops and the long-period swells begin to rhythmically compress the water column, a massive prognathodon, a species of mosasaur explicitly known for its incredibly robust, bone-crushing jaws, detects the approaching turbulence through its highly sensitive lateral lines long before the very first raindrops shatter the ocean's surface. It responds with the calm, instinctual grace of a creature perfectly and flawlessly adapted to a highly volatile planet. It simply angles its massive, heavy, completely streamlined body downward, powerfully sweeping its deep, muscular tail fluke to descend rapidly into the heavy, quiet, pressurized darkness far below the storm's destructive reach. The physiological adaptations required for this are staggering. As it dives, its heart rate slows dramatically in a biological process known as bradycardia, drastically conserving oxygen, while its flexible rib cage gracefully collapses slightly under the immense hydrostatic pressure to prevent the crushing destruction of its lungs. At a depth of 50 meters, the violent, chaotic thrashing of the surface is reduced to a gentle, rhythmic swaying. At 100 meters deep, the water is perfectly, utterly still, wrapped in a cold, silent emerald twilight. Here, in the pressurized, perfectly insulated sanctuary of the deep water, several adult mosasaurs might temporarily congregate, suspended effortlessly in the heavy, ancient salt water, patiently waiting out the atmospheric violence playing out far above their heavily armored heads. They do not feel human anxiety or existential fear. They do not worry about the destruction of coastal nesting sites or the catastrophic shifting of shallow sandbars. They merely exist, perfectly present. This stark, undeniable contrast between the violent chaos of the surface and the absolute, unwavering serenity of the depths offers a profound philosophical reflection on exactly how we, as modern humans, perceive completely natural events. We have evolved to view powerful storms, shifting tectonic plates, and changing climates as existential threats, as terrible anomalies that violently disrupt the fragile, carefully constructed stability of our modern civilizations. We desperately build massive seawalls, reinforce our concrete foundations, and nervously chart the weather with anxious precision, attempting to force the dynamic, endlessly shifting Earth into a static, predictable, heavily controlled mold. But the planet is inherently a fluid, profoundly energetic system. The hypercanes of the Cretaceous were not cruel tragedies. They were the essential, necessary mechanisms of planetary thermal redistribution, maintaining the delicate thermodynamic balance of the entire global ecosystem. The Mosasaurs understood this reality not through complex intellectual analysis, but through millions upon millions of years of cellular adaptation. They surrendered completely and utterly to the immense physical forces of their world, recognizing that resistance to the fundamental physical laws of the universe is ultimately futile. When we can finally internalize this profound geological truth, we experience a deeply liberating dissolution of our own anthropocentric anxieties. The rigid, demanding structures of our daily lives, the pressing deadlines, the complex social negotiations, the constant low-level hum of existential worry, all of these things are momentarily revealed as incredibly recent, incredibly fragile fabrications layered over a planet that operates on a timeline completely indifferent to human ambition. By mentally placing ourselves in the cold, quiet depths alongside the resting leviathans, we can borrow their ancient, instinctual peace. We can allow the turbulent storms of our own lives to rage on the surface, knowing that there is always a deep, quiet sanctuary waiting below, a place of fundamental stillness where the physical laws of the universe hold us in a perfectly secure, buoyant embrace. The ancient ocean is perfectly flat now, a dark mirror reflecting a sky filled with unfamiliar stars. The leviathans are resting. The earth is quietly turning. There's absolutely nothing left for you to do but drift. As the hypercane dissipates and chaotic atmospheric energies are reabsorbed into the planetary heat sink, the surface of the great western interior seaway returns to an undulating calm. We must turn our attention away from the violent sunlit upper layers and descend slowly into the cooler twilight zones of this ancient ocean. While the colossal mosasaurs are universally recognized as the absolute apex predators, they were not the only magnificent reptilian engineers occupying these waters. The late Cretaceous sea was a highly complex ecological tapestry, and to fully appreciate its immense diversity, we must closely observe the stranger denizens sharing this liquid domain. Gliding silently through the dimly lit middle water column, where the azure light fades into a heavy indigo, is a creature so bizarre in its anatomical proportions that early paleontologists initially struggled to assemble its fossilized remains correctly. This is the Elasmosaurus, a highly specialized plesiosaur. Its body is relatively compact, somewhat resembling a massive turtle without a shell, propelled by 4 powerful wing-like flippers that allow it to essentially fly through the dense salt water with a graceful flapping motion. But it is the neck of the Elasmosaurus that truly defies all modern mammalian comprehension. Measuring over 7 meters in length, representing more than half of the animal's entire total body length, this absurdly elongated appendage consists of over 70 individual cervical vertebrae, granting it a level of terrifying flexibility that no other marine creature has ever achieved. Before we continue to explore the surreal hunting strategies of this long-necked leviathan, I want to take a small, quiet moment to speak with you directly. I am Frank, the Archaeologist, and it is my absolute privilege to carefully guide your mind through these vast prehistoric oceans. I was looking through our community statistics recently, and I saw that exactly 71.9% of the people who watch these videos and comfortably allow themselves to drift to sleep have not yet subscribed to the channel. If you find peace, intellectual stimulation, and a deep sense of wonder in these meticulously reconstructed worlds, please consider subscribing. It genuinely helps our channel immensely, ensuring we can continue to carefully excavate these lost narratives for you. Now, let us sink back into the indigo depths, breathing slowly and steadily, completely surrendering to the ancient rhythmic pulse of the deep water. The Elasmosaurus employs a hunting strategy entirely different from the explosive brute force ambushes of the mosasaurs. While the Tylosaurus relies heavily on massive acceleration and bone-crushing impact, the long-necked plesiosaur utilizes absolute stealth and bizarre optical illusions. Cruising slowly through the shadowy depths, the Elasmosaurus positions its bulky body far below a dense, shimmering school of small fish. In the dim light, its dark back completely camouflages its presence from anything swimming above it. Then, deliberately, it extends its impossibly long neck upward, navigating its delicate head right into the center of the dense bait ball. The fish, highly attuned to detecting large predators, completely fail to register the thin, snake-like neck as a significant threat. They simply part slightly, swimming right past the jaws of their executioner. With rapid darting movements, the Elasmosaurus snaps its jaws shut, its needle-like teeth perfectly interlocking to trap the slippery prey. It is a masterpiece of evolutionary specialization, a delicate approach to predation that perfectly counterbalances the violent dominance of the mosasaurs. Yet, despite its incredible size, the Elasmosaurus is highly vulnerable. If a mature mosasaur detects the plesiosaur in the open water, a brutal and asymmetrical conflict ensues. The heavy armored jaws of a prognathodon can easily snap the delicate, elongated neck of an Elasmosaurus with a single devastating bite, proving that in this ancient ocean, sheer, overwhelming power remains the ultimate evolutionary currency. This stark reality of constant, unavoidable predation forces us to critically examine how the supreme rulers of the Cretaceous Sea ensured the continuation of their own genetic legacy. Unlike sea turtles, which must undertake exhausting migrations to lay their leathery eggs in the warm sand of terrestrial beaches, the mosasaurs had entirely severed their last biological ties to the solid land. They did not drag their massive bodies onto the shore to reproduce. Doing so would have resulted in immediate asphyxiation as their immense weight crushed their vital organs. Instead, through the brilliant logic of natural selection, mosasaurs evolved viviparity, the ability to give birth to completely live, fully formed young directly into the open ocean. Deep within the protected, shallow coastal nurseries of the western interior seaway, tangled within dense underwater forests of giant kelp, a female mosasaur prepares to deliver her offspring. There is no complex maternal care, no gentle nurturing in this harsh reptilian world. As the miniature, perfectly formed mosasaurs, measuring perhaps 1.5 meters in length, are violently expelled from their mother's body, they must immediately and instinctively swim toward the surface to take their very first breath of atmospheric air. From the absolute moment of their birth, they are completely independent predators, instantly thrust into a volatile ecosystem where almost everything actively views them as a potential source of highly nutritious protein. Their survival depends entirely on their ability to remain hidden within the dense shadows of the coastal kelp forests, feeding on small fish and crustaceans, growing with astonishing rapidity in the superheated waters. Their highly vascularized bones allow them to pack on immense muscular mass at a rate that completely defies the sluggish growth cycles of modern reptiles. They are biological machines, locked in a relentless race against time, needing to quickly attain a body size large enough to transition from vulnerable prey to undisputed apex predator. The sheer improbability of their survival highlights the immense brutal mathematics of the natural world. Out of a dozen newly born mosasaurs, perhaps only one will successfully navigate the gauntlet of the Cretaceous nursery to achieve the staggering proportions of adulthood. Yet, this highly ruthless culling process is exactly what forged their lineage into the absolute masters of the sea, continuously stripping away any genetic weakness and ensuring that only the fastest and most aggressively instinctual individuals survived. When we allow our human minds to deeply contemplate the incredibly vast spans of time over which these highly complex ecological dramas played out, we often experience a profound sense of temporal vertigo. Our own individual lifespans seem painfully insignificant when directly compared to the 15 million years that the mosasaurs reigned supreme. We measure our personal histories in days, weeks, and carefully marked calendar years, anxiously tracking our perceived progress. But the ancient ocean measures time in the unimaginably slow accumulation of microscopic chalk, in the gradual tectonic separation of continents, and in the patient morphing of biological forms. To the deep earth, 1,000,000 years is nothing but a fleeting passing season. This perspective, rather than inducing existential dread, can actually become a profound source of intellectual comfort and psychological release. When we feel overwhelmed by the highly demanding pace of our modern lives, we can intentionally close our eyes and mentally return to the silent depths of the Cretaceous Sea. We can visualize the slow, rhythmic sweep of the Leviathan's tail, a movement completely unhurried by the concept of time itself. The Mosasaurus did not harbor regrets about its past hunts, nor did it experience anxiety about the storms of the future. It was perfectly grounded in the immediate physical sensation of the water flowing over its streamlined scales. By deliberately connecting our own slow, rhythmic breathing to the imagined respirations of these ancient marine reptiles, we can begin to untether ourselves from the frantic frequencies of the modern world. Feel the cool air slowly entering your lungs, just as the ancient beasts inhaled the thick atmosphere of the hothouse planet. As you slowly and deeply exhale, actively release the tight muscles in your shoulders, allowing your physical body to sink heavily into the comforting embrace of gravity. Imagine the profound darkness of the deep water enveloping you, creating a perfectly insulated sanctuary where the relentless noise of human civilization cannot possibly reach. The prehistoric ocean is completely calm. The giant marine reptiles are sleeping suspended in the deep, warm currents. The microscopic marine snow continues its silent, beautiful descent in the absolute dark. Let your consciousness dissolve into this vast, ancient quietness. The entire weight of the deep past is here to hold you securely, requiring absolutely nothing from you, judging nothing you have done, and simply allowing you to exist in a state of pure, uninterrupted peace. Allow the ancient currents to carry you effortlessly into the deep. To genuinely comprehend the sheer impermanence of the physical world we inhabit, we must look beyond the immediate biological struggles of the giant marine reptiles and turn our contemplative gaze toward the monumental, unimaginably slow physical forces that actually carved their watery domain out of solid bedrock. The Great Western Interior Seaway, That vast, shallow ocean dividing the North American continent into two distinct landmasses known to science as Laramidia and Appalachia was absolutely not a permanent fixture of our planet. It was a temporary, spectacular anomaly, born directly from the agonizingly slow collision of massive tectonic plates. Far to the west, the ancient Farallon Oceanic Plate was relentlessly grinding its way beneath the North American continental plate in a subterranean process called subduction. This immense geological friction did not merely build the towering ancestral Rocky Mountains. The immense downward pull of the sinking slab literally warped the entire continental crust, creating a vast, sweeping topographic depression right in the absolute center of the landmass. Before we continue to witness the slow, inevitable flooding of this magnificent continent, I want to pause the narrative for a very brief moment. I am Frank, the archaeologist, and I am deeply honored to be your guide through these submerged chapters of Earth's history. I noticed that exactly 71.9% of the people who watch these videos and find a much-needed moment of peace within them have not yet actively subscribed to the channel. If you genuinely appreciate these slow, meditative journeys into deep time, please consider subscribing. It profoundly helps our community grow and allows me to keep meticulously unearthing these lost realities for you to explore night after night. Now, let us return to the heavy, silent shifting of the ancient tectonic plates and the relentlessly rising tides of the Cretaceous Sea. As average global temperatures soared dramatically during the intense Cretaceous hothouse period, melting remaining terrestrial ice caps and causing superheated ocean water to physically expand, global sea levels rose dramatically to eagerly fill this newly formed continental basin. The ocean crept inland at a glacial pace of perhaps a few mere millimeters per single calendar year, an advance so agonizingly slow that no individual ancient marine lizard could ever perceive it happening. Yet, over the span of a few million years, lush coastal forests were gradually swallowed by expanding salt marshes, which were in turn drowned by rising tides, until a continuous channel of warm seawater completely severed the continent from the freezing darkness of the Arctic down to the tropical Gulf. Into this incredibly productive aquatic frontier flooded an entire menagerie of evolutionary opportunists. The mosasaurs shared their sprawling kingdom with a bizarre array of highly specialized organisms, many adopting physical forms that completely defy our modern understanding of marine biology. Suspended perfectly in the gentle currents of the inland seaway, we find the strange and fascinating heteromorph ammonites. Unlike their more common relatives, which constructed perfectly symmetrical spiral shells, the heteromorphs abandoned conventional geometry entirely. Their intricately ribbed shells twisted and unspooled into chaotic shapes, closely resembling massive paperclips or unraveled ribbons hanging suspended in the blue void. For several centuries, brilliant human paleontologists were entirely baffled by these strange, seemingly maladaptive physical structures. How could an animal possibly swim efficiently while dragging such an awkward shell through the dense salt water? Through highly complex computer modeling and meticulous fluid dynamic simulations, modern science has finally revealed that these uncoiled ammonites were essentially living submarines, perfectly calibrated for absolute neutral buoyancy. They did not need to actively chase down incredibly fast prey. Instead, they drifted effortlessly in warm currents, slowly extending sticky tentacles to silently capture microscopic plankton and tiny crustaceans that drifted past their strangely shaped fortresses. They were the absolute masters of a highly energy-efficient existence, filling the entire water column with millions of softly bobbing shells. But in the violent ecosystem of the late Cretaceous ocean, No physical defense was entirely impenetrable. To directly counter the heavy calcium carbonate armor of the abundant ammonites, evolutionary pressures produced a highly specialized branch of the formidable mosasaur family tree, the incredible globidans. Its massive, powerful jaws were heavily lined with rows of thick, completely blunt teeth that heavily resembled smooth river stones. When a hungry globidans encountered a heavily armored ammonite, it would simply clamp its muscular jaws over the spiraled exterior and effortlessly crush the shell with a localized bite force that easily shattered the thickest biological armor nature had ever produced. When the explosive struggles of the mid-water column finally reached their inevitable quiet conclusions, the heavy, shattered remnants of those ancient battles began their slow descent toward the distant seafloor. This dark, abyssal zone, forever shrouded in perpetual cold twilight and heavily blanketed by continuously falling marine snow, was the undisputed domain of the ocean's most brutally efficient recyclers. As the torn carcass of a deceased plesiosaur drifts downward, it is almost immediately detected by the highly sensitive olfactory sensors of Squalicerax, an extinct genus of predatory shark frequently referred to as the crow shark. Measuring roughly 3 to 5 meters in total length, Squalicerax was certainly not the largest predator in the ecosystem, but it was undeniably one of the most ecologically successful. Its powerful jaws were lined with distinctive, heavily serrated, razor-sharp crescent-shaped teeth, remarkably similar to those of a modern tiger shark. These specialized teeth were precision biological saws, perfectly evolved for efficiently dismantling the tough carcasses of dead marine reptiles. Long before the heavy carcass can even settle onto the soft mud of the deep seabed, a swirling, frenzied vortex of these highly aggressive scavengers envelops it entirely. In the cold, unfeeling mathematics of the natural world, physical death is never a tragic ending. It is simply a profoundly necessary redistribution of essential biological resources. What little remains of the scavenged carcass, the incredibly dense fragments of ancient bone, finally comes to rest on the quiet floor of the inland sea. Here, securely buried in the hypoxic mud, the slow process of fossilization begins in absolute darkness. The soft organic marrow is meticulously replaced atom by dissolving silica and heavy minerals filtering slowly down through the thick sediment, a completely quiet substitution taking tens of thousands of calendar years to complete. As we carefully observe this almost invisible geological process, we are fundamentally forced to confront the terrifying brevity of our own human existence. We constantly measure our modern lives in highly anxious artificial increments, the stressful passing of a crucial deadline, the rapid transition of a fiscal quarter. We foolishly allow these fabricated metrics to generate immense anxiety within our fragile minds, but the silent, fossilizing bones resting patiently in the dark mud offer a deeply liberating perspective. They softly whisper to us of deep geological time, of an earth that has been slowly, beautifully turning for billions of years long before we arrived, and will patiently continue to turn for billions of years after our entire species has become nothing more than a faint chemical signature buried deep in sedimentary rock. The massive tectonic plates will continue to slowly collide, the global oceans will patiently rise and fall, and the universe will infinitely expand in magnificent indifference to our tiny human struggles. This profound realization wonderfully frees us from the exhausting burden of universal importance. Let this profound sense of cosmic insignificance act as a heavy, comforting blanket for your overactive mind tonight. There is a deep, abiding peace to be found in simply acknowledging exactly how incredibly small we truly are in the grand tapestry of the cosmos. As the vivid image of the scavenging shark slowly fades into the gentle currents of your fading imagination, allow your own physical body to deeply emulate the slow, sinking trajectory of the ancient fossils. Feel the heavy, unavoidable pull of gravity anchoring you securely and warmly to your bed, exactly as the dense bones are permanently anchored to the quiet seabed. The prehistoric water above you is incredibly deep, dark, and perfectly still. The chaotic storms of the surface cannot possibly reach you down here in the silent depths. The desperate struggles of the apex predators are happening in a completely different world, permanently separated from you by millions of silent years and hundreds of meters of heavy salt water. You are safely surrounded by the slow, eternal patience of pure geology. The solid earth beneath you is quietly supporting your physical weight, just as it has faithfully supported the heavy oceans and the forgotten reptilian dynasties of the deep past. Breathe in the dark, heavy silence of the deep ocean. Exhale all the lingering electric static of your waking life. There is absolutely no urgency required here. The ancient, slow-beating heart of the planet is setting the only rhythm that matters now. Surrender your thoughts completely to this magnificent rhythm. Drift effortlessly into the welcoming, absolute darkness. To truly comprehend the multi-dimensional, staggering architecture of the late Cretaceous ocean, we must completely abandon the warm, sunlit upper layers where the great mosasaurs predominantly hunt and willingly descend into the crushing absolute darkness of the true abyssal zones. As we mentally sink past the 500-meter mark, the last residual, highly energetic photons of solar radiation are completely absorbed, scattered, and entirely extinguished by the incredibly dense, heavy salt water. The vibrant, life-affirming turquoise and the shifting, mesmerizing indigo of the highly active surface world gradually give way to an uncompromising, infinite blackness that human eyes cannot possibly penetrate, no matter how desperately they strain. The ambient temperature of the water plummets drastically as we cross the ancient thermocline, hovering just a few degrees above absolute freezing, and the hydrostatic pressure increases to an incomprehensible level that would instantaneously implode a modern titanium submarine. Yet, this terrifying pitch-black void is absolutely not a sterile, empty wasteland devoid of biological significance. It is a highly specialized, fiercely competitive biological frontier, illuminated only by the cold, ghostly, ephemeral flashes of bioluminescent organisms sparking like isolated microscopic galaxies against the crushing void. It is an alien world where vision is entirely secondary to vibration, where every single biological interaction is a calculated gamble against the crushing weight of the ocean above, and where the relentless downward drift of marine snow provides the only steady influx of highly coveted calories. Before we navigate further into this alien, lightless domain to witness the titanic struggles hidden in the absolute dark, I must momentarily pause the narrative to speak directly with you. I am Frank, the archaeologist, and I am profoundly grateful to be your dedicated guide through these silent, forgotten depths of our planet's deep history. I have noticed through our analytical data that exactly 71.9% of the people who watch these videos and find deep solace in these ancient watery realms have not yet subscribed to the channel. If you genuinely find intellectual comfort, a decrease in your daily anxiety, and a peaceful escape within these meticulously reconstructed stories, please consider subscribing. It genuinely helps our community immensely, ensuring that we can continue illuminating these dark, ancient mysteries for you night after night. Now, let us return to the crushing, beautiful silence of the deep and breathe in the heavy rhythm of the abyss. Down here, in the permanent, unyielding midnight of the Cretaceous Sea, the fundamental rules of survival are completely inverted. The giant, air-breathing reptiles of the surface world rarely venture this incredibly deep, as the immense physiological toll of the crushing hydrostatic pressure and the freezing temperatures heavily outweighs the potential caloric reward of any deep-sea prey. Instead, this lightless, freezing kingdom is entirely ruled by the invertebrates, the ancient, soft-bodied masters of the abyss who have perfectly adapted their cellular structures to withstand the crushing weight of the world. Gliding completely silently through the freezing water is Tusoteuthis, a colossal cephalopod, a nightmare relative of our modern giant squids. Measuring up to 11 meters from the top of its muscular mantle to the very tip of its incredibly long, grasping tentacles, this massive creature is an absolute marvel of deep-sea evolutionary engineering. It does not possess a heavy calcium carbonate shell like the ammonites floating far above it, but rather a rigid internal gladius, a pen-like structure of highly flexible chitin that supports its massive muscular body without adding unnecessary dangerous weight. Tusoteuthis hunts in the complete and absolute absence of sunlight, relying on enormous, highly sensitive eyes, each roughly the size of a human dinner plate, designed specifically to capture the faintest, most microscopic glimmers of bioluminescence emitted by distressed prey. Its 8 heavily muscled arms and 2 incredibly long, whip-like feeding tentacles are entirely lined with hundreds of sharp, hooked claws, ready to violently snare anything that inadvertently swims into its invisible, floating biological trap. The sheer, undeniable existence of such a magnificently complex creature forces us to completely reevaluate our deeply ingrained terrestrial bias regarding intelligence and biological sophistication. Cephalopods represent an entirely separate, highly successful branch of evolutionary brilliance, an intelligence that evolved in a medium where the heavy burden of gravity is entirely suspended and the surrounding environment is a continuous three-dimensional fluid. The Tusoteuthis does not build sprawling civilizations or conquer vast territories. It simply reacts to its immediate environment with terrifying, calculated, and flawless efficiency. Suddenly, the pitch-black water surrounding the giant squid is shattered by a brilliant, cascading explosion of neon blue light. A massive school of deep-sea lanternfish, instantly disturbed by the gentle, almost imperceptible displacement of water from the squid's approaching mantle, simultaneously trigger their chemical photophores. This is a desperate, highly coordinated defensive mechanism intended to temporarily blind and cognitively confuse the giant predator by overloading its massive light-sensitive retinas. The abyss briefly and spectacularly illuminates, revealing the terrifying, undulating silhouette of the Tusoteuthis, its heavily armed tentacles flared outward like a horrific, grasping underwater flower. With a singular, immensely powerful contraction of its muscular mantle, the massive squid expels a highly pressurized jet of freezing water through its muscular siphon, rocketing its heavy body forward directly into the glowing, chaotic cloud of panicked fish. Its hooked tentacles lash out with blinding speed, securing multiple struggling bodies in a fraction of a single second, before drawing them violently back to the sharp parrot-like beak hidden entirely within the writhing center of its arms. It is a silent, beautiful massacre, lit exclusively by the cold, dying light of the prey itself, a spectacular, momentary fireworks display of predator and prey that is instantly and ruthlessly swallowed back into the eternal crushing darkness of the abyssal plain. While the abyssal zone is permanently dominated by these soft-bodied invertebrate giants, they are absolutely not entirely safe from the desperate reach of the reptilian monarchs ruling the sunlit world far above. Occasionally, a highly specialized, deeply adapted species of mosasaur, such as the formidable Plateosaurus, might aggressively and intentionally push the absolute physical limits of its reptilian biology to plunge headfirst into this freezing, pressurized nightmare. Driven by immense gnawing hunger, or perhaps the targeted pursuit of a highly nutritious, deep-dwelling prey item, the Plateosaurus begins a steep, incredibly rapid vertical descent from the warm, sunlit surface. As it aggressively dives past the 1,000-meter mark, its physical body undergoes agonizingly extreme, highly evolved transformations. Its massive lungs completely collapse inward, violently pushing all remaining atmospheric air into the rigid, uncompressible upper airways to prevent the deadly toxic absorption of nitrogen gas directly into its bloodstream. Its powerful heart rate drops precipitously to a mere 2 or 3 single beats per minute, effectively placing the massive 15-ton animal into a highly dangerous state of suspended biological animation, while it simultaneously remains entirely conscious and highly lethal. The eventual collision of these two completely alien worlds, the air-breathing, heavily armored reptilian leviathan plunging from the bright surface and the giant soft-bodied cephalopod rising from the permanent dark, is a profoundly silent titanic struggle that leaves absolutely no fossilized record of the actual combat. If the Plateosaurus manages to successfully detect the Tusoteuthis in the absolute dark, utilizing its highly sensitive lateral lines to feel the massive, chaotic displacement of deep water, a brutal contest of raw endurance and oxygen deprivation immediately begins. The heavily armored mosasaur must secure a completely lethal crushing bite before its precious, extremely limited oxygen reserves are entirely depleted by the intense muscular exertion. The giant squid, conversely, will frantically utilize its heavy clawed tentacles to aggressively wrap around the reptile's sensitive snout and massive eyes, desperately trying to suffocate, blind, or disorient the reptilian intruder, while simultaneously pumping massive rhythmic jets of freezing water from its mantle to rapidly escape backward into the welcoming void. It is a desperate, completely invisible war fought in the absolute coldest, most highly pressurized, and most unforgiving environment on the entire planet. If the mosasaur succeeds, it must immediately begin a slow, highly calculated, and exhausting ascent back to the surface, dragging the massive, incredibly heavy invertebrate carcass upward through the rapidly changing pressure zones. If the mosasaur fails, or if it simply miscalculates the immense, devastating physiological toll of the crushing depth, it will slowly lose consciousness. Its massive armored body will simply stop swimming, becoming just another incredibly heavy, sinking source of precious nutrients for the endless swarms of scavenging sharks, bone-eating worms, and deep-sea detritivores waiting patiently in the freezing mud of the seafloor far below. When we deliberately choose to project our human minds into this terrifying, absolutely lightless environment, we almost always encounter a deep, highly instinctual human fear of the dark. We psychologically associate the complete absence of light with the absence of life, with an empty, terrifying, malicious void that aggressively threatens our fragile terrestrial existence. But the deep Cretaceous ocean teaches us a completely different, profoundly comforting philosophical lesson if we are willing to listen. The dark is absolutely not a vast, empty wasteland. It is an incredibly full, vibrant, and highly active ecological space. It is a quiet sanctuary where life operates by an entirely different set of physical and biological rules, utterly independent of the burning dictatorial sun that heavily regulates our waking human lives. The absolute darkness of the oceanic abyss is not a malignant evil force. It is a perfectly neutral, highly protective, and heavily insulating blanket that shields these ancient, delicate organisms from the chaotic, turbulent, and highly irradiated surface world. By actively recognizing that our profound human fear of the dark is merely a recent, highly artificial evolutionary artifact of our own specific terrestrial history, we can gently and deliberately begin to let it go. We can consciously choose to view the complete absence of light not as a terrifying existential threat, but as a deeply necessary, profoundly peaceful state of absolute rest. The darkness does not care about your insecurities, your deadlines, or your perceived failures. It simply exists, completely indifferent and wonderfully accommodating. Let this profound, liberating realization guide your physical body as you carefully prepare to cross the quiet, delicate boundary into sleep tonight. Imagine, with vivid detail, that you are slowly, safely sinking down through the warm, sunlit upper layers of your daily anxieties. You are drifting gently and effortlessly past the turbulent, chaotic storms of your waking thoughts, sinking deeper and deeper, and finally settling down into the quiet, incredibly heavy protective darkness of the deep abyssal plain. Here, at the very bottom of the ancient forgotten world, the crushing hydrostatic pressure does not hurt you in any way. Instead, it acts as a warm, incredibly heavy, deeply comforting weighted blanket, gently pressing out all the residual, vibrating muscular tension tightly coiled in your chest, your shoulders, your neck, and your heavy limbs. The prehistoric water down here is perfectly, eternally, and flawlessly still. There are absolutely no sudden jarring noises, no urgent demanding emails, no societal pressures upon your highly depleted energy. There is only the slow, rhythmic, completely invisible pulse of the ancient, deep ocean currents, moving massive, unimaginable volumes of heavy salt water across the globe in a silent, continuous planetary heartbeat. Actively synchronize your own breathing with this immense, incredibly slow geological rhythm. Deeply inhale the cold, quiet, absolute peace of the deep earth. Slowly exhale all the frantic, burning, exhausting light of the chaotic surface world. You are completely, unquestionably safe in this ancient, lightless sanctuary. The giant, terrifying predators of the deep are fighting their silent, desperate battles millions upon millions of years in the past, completely and permanently separated from your current, peaceful reality. The heavy, soft sediment of deep geological time is slowly, continuously covering you, deeply protecting you, and softly burying your consciousness in absolute, unwavering peace. Allow yourself to drift effortlessly into the welcoming, eternal dark. The deep ocean is holding you now, and there is absolutely nothing left for you to do but rest. To fully grasp the uncontested global dominion of these magnificent marine reptiles, we must expand our limited human perspective far beyond the warm, shallow confines of the western interior seaway. We must aggressively push our geographical boundaries outward, navigating into the vast, newly expanding pelagic zones of the ancient Proto-Atlantic Ocean. During the Late Cretaceous period, the supercontinent of Pangaea was in the final agonizing stages of its monumental tectonic divorce. The massive landmasses of South America and Africa, locked together for hundreds of millions of years in a tight geological embrace, were being violently and relentlessly torn apart by deep subterranean volcanic rifts. This incredibly slow tectonic unzipping allowed the ancient global ocean to rush into the widening abyssal gap, creating an entirely new, incredibly deep, and highly turbulent body of salt water. This newly formed oceanic corridor was not merely a physical barrier between drifting continents. It functioned as a massive high-speed biological highway, a deep churning conduit driven by immensely powerful thermal currents circulating the heat of the hothouse planet. To cross this vast, uncharted blue wilderness required a creature of almost incomprehensible scale and biological endurance, an animal that had entirely transcended the need for coastal sanctuaries. As we prepare to join one of these solitary leviathans on a transoceanic migration across the completely untamed ancient Atlantic, I want to take a brief, quiet moment to speak with you directly. I am Frank, the archaeologist, and it is my absolute honor to be your dedicated guide through these vast prehistoric oceans. Looking at our expedition logs, I've noticed that exactly 71.9% of the people who watch these videos and comfortably allow themselves to drift away into the ancient eras have not yet subscribed to the channel. If you genuinely find true relaxation, intellectual peace, and a profound sense of cosmic wonder in these contemplative journeys, please consider subscribing. It genuinely helps our small community grow immensely, ensuring I can continue meticulously uncovering these forgotten epochs for you night after night. Now, let us return to the heavy oceanic breathing of a world completely untroubled by the frantic pace of the modern age, and let us venture out into the infinite deep blue. Suspended in the absolute center of this newly formed infinite expanse of water is the undisputed king of the late Cretaceous oceans, Mosasaurus hoffmanni. This specific species is the absolute zenith of marine reptilian evolution, a creature so completely massive that its mere existence challenges the fundamental physical limits of biological engineering. Measuring an astonishing 17 meters from its heavily armored snout to the very tip of its sweeping tail fluke, and weighing potentially over 20 tons, it is a living, breathing biological submarine. Unlike the ambush predators that continuously patrol the shallow, murky coastlines, this colossal animal is built for sustained, unrelenting endurance. Its massive cylindrical torso is packed with incredibly dense, highly vascularized muscle tissue, and its heart, an organ roughly the size of a modern automobile engine, pumps hundreds of gallons of heavily oxygenated blood through its massive vascular system with every single booming contraction. Out here, in the vast, featureless blue desert of the open pelagic zone, there are absolutely no underwater kelp forests to hide within, no rocky coastal outcrops to use for camouflage, and no shallow sandbars to corner panicked prey. There is only the incredibly bright, punishing ultraviolet radiation of the sun burning down from above, and the terrifying, bottomless, crushing darkness stretching thousands of meters below. How does a creature of this immense size successfully navigate across thousands of kilometers of completely featureless open water without losing its biological bearings? The answer lies in a highly sophisticated sensory adaptation that modern science is only just beginning to fully understand: magnetoreception. Deep within the complex, heavily armored architecture of its massive skull, the Mosasaurus possesses specialized biological structures containing microscopic crystals of magnetite. These Incredibly tiny, iron-rich particles align perfectly with the invisible pulsing electromagnetic field generated by the spinning, molten iron core of the planet Earth. As the massive reptile slowly and rhythmically sweeps its head from side to side, it is not merely tasting the chemical composition of the salt water. It is actively, consciously reading the invisible magnetic topography of the entire globe. It perceives the subtle, fluctuating angles of magnetic inclination and the varying intensities of the planetary field as clearly and definitively as a human pilot reads an advanced navigational display. It is completely locked onto the fundamental physical frequency of the planet itself, allowing it to accurately chart a course across the empty ocean with terrifying, unwavering precision. The journey across this ancient proto-Atlantic is a profoundly solitary experience. For weeks and perhaps even months, the giant Mosasaurus encounters absolutely nothing but the endless rhythmic undulating of the deep blue swells. In our highly connected, completely saturated modern existence, this level of total, absolute isolation would be psychologically devastating to a human mind. We constantly surround ourselves with incessant digital noise, demanding notifications, and the exhausting continuous hum of societal expectations. We passionately dread the quiet moments of being entirely alone with our own thoughts, rushing desperately to fill every single second of our waking lives with artificial stimulation. But for the mosasaur, this immense oceanic solitude is not a psychological burden. It is a state of absolute, pure existence. It does not feel lonely, nor does it anxiously anticipate its eventual arrival. It simply exists, perfectly suspended in the immediate physical reality of the heavy saltwater flowing smoothly over its scales, the deep satisfying burn of oxygen in its massive lungs, and the silent, comforting pull of the Earth's magnetic field guiding it steadily onward. Suddenly, the unbroken monotony of the open water is interrupted by a bizarre, incredibly rare biological anomaly. Floating aimlessly on the surface currents, hundreds of kilometers from the nearest coastline, is a massive tangled island of uprooted trees, decaying ferns, and terrestrial soil. This is an ephemeral floating raft, violently torn from a distant coastal forest during a particularly severe hypercane and dragged out into the open ocean by powerful rip currents. Resting atop this decaying island is something truly extraordinary: the bloated carcass of a gigantic long-necked titanosaur dinosaur. This massive terrestrial herbivore has been entirely washed out to sea, becoming an unimaginable floating feast of highly concentrated protein in the absolute middle of a nutritional desert. The Mosasaurus, having detected the heavy chemical signature of decaying flesh from dozens of kilometers away, accelerates its massive body with slow, deliberate strokes of its muscular tail. As the Leviathan confidently approaches the floating terrestrial island, it does not act with the frantic desperation of the smaller scavenging sharks that are already aggressively circling. It is the absolute monarch of this domain, asserting its terrifying dominance with complete, unwavering authority. With a sudden explosive burst of raw kinetic energy, the 17-meter Mosasaurus erupts from the water, its heavy jaws clamping down viciously on the long, decaying neck of the deceased dinosaur. The sheer, uncompromising force of the bite shatters the massive cervical vertebrae, and with a violent twisting roll, the marine reptile effortlessly rips thousands of pounds of flesh away from the raft. It is a spectacular intersection of two completely different ecosystems, entirely surrounded by the infinite, uncaring blue void of the open ocean. When we allow our tired, heavily burdened human minds to actively visualize this profound, solitary journey across the ancient, infinite ocean, we can begin to tap into a deeply comforting, liberating sense of isolation. The vast, empty spaces of the Late Cretaceous pelagic zone represent a complete, absolute detachment from the frantic, overcrowded, heavily constructed environments of our modern civilization. Out here, in the deep blue, there are absolutely no societal expectations pressing down heavily upon your shoulders. There are no incredibly complex, emotionally exhausting relationships to carefully navigate, no urgent professional responsibilities to nervously fulfill, and absolutely no artificial timelines aggressively dictating your intrinsic personal value. There is only the massive, comforting, infinite expanse of the deep water, the slow, rhythmic, completely undeniable physical turning of the planet, and the deep, silent, magnetic pulse of the earth, providing perfect, infallible guidance. By mentally isolating yourself in this magnificent, ancient oceanic void, you can intentionally strip away all the highly unnecessary, incredibly noisy complications of your daily waking life. You can deliberately choose to temporarily uncouple your consciousness from the exhausting, continuous stream of external demands. Imagine your own physical body as completely and entirely buoyant, perfectly and effortlessly suspended in the warm, heavy, incredibly dense salt water of the Proto-Atlantic. Feel the gentle, rhythmic, slow-rolling swells of the ancient ocean softly rocking you, pushing and pulling your relaxed limbs with the natural, unhurried cadence of the changing planetary tides. The intense, burning ultraviolet light of the day has gracefully faded, entirely replaced by a spectacular, breathtaking canopy of ancient, unfamiliar stars shining down brilliantly upon a world completely untouched by human interference. You are fundamentally, beautifully alone in this vastness, but you are absolutely not lost. You are securely, deeply tethered to the very core of the planet itself, perfectly aligned with the quiet, invisible magnetic currents that have safely guided giant creatures through the dark waters for millions upon millions of years. Let this profound, comforting sense of immense scale and perfect solitude slowly wash completely over you. Breathe in the clean, ancient, highly oxygenated air of the open ocean. Exhale all the lingering, frantic noise of the heavily populated continents you have successfully left far behind. The Leviathan continues its long, solitary journey in the deep dark below, completely unbothered, perfectly adapted, and intimately at peace with the infinite expanse of its watery universe. Allow your own racing thoughts to dramatically slow their frantic pace, heavily syncing with the deeply resonant, incredibly slow heart rate of the giant resting beneath the waves. There is absolutely nowhere else you desperately need to be right now. There is absolutely nothing else you urgently need to accomplish. You are completely, unquestionably safe, perfectly supported by the immense depth of geological time, and softly enveloped by the eternal, quiet patience of the ancient, waiting sea. Let go of the heavy terrestrial shores entirely. Surrender your consciousness completely to the deep, silent currents of the open blue. Drift incredibly peacefully, drifting further and further out into the welcoming, absolute, and magnificent dark. To completely deconstruct our inherently biased modern understanding of planetary environments, we must actively pilot our floating consciousness far away from the superheated tropical equatorial zones and aggressively venture into the extreme northern latitudes of the late Cretaceous globe. When we mentally conjure the image of the prehistoric Arctic Ocean, Our minds are stubbornly filled with visions of impenetrable sea ice, towering glaciers, and an absolute, freezing desolation that repels complex reptilian life. However, 80 million years ago, the Earth was experiencing a profound greenhouse phase of such spectacular magnitude that the polar ice caps simply did not physically exist. The incredibly high concentrations of atmospheric carbon dioxide trapped the immense solar radiation so effectively that the global heat was smoothly circulated all the way to the very top of the world. If you were to stand upon the ancient northernmost shorelines of what would eventually become the freezing landmasses of modern-day Alaska or Svalbard, you would not be greeted by a stark tundra. Instead, you would find yourself standing at the lush edge of a towering, deeply shadowed temperate rainforest. Massive ancient redwood trees and broad-leafed ferns grew directly up to the rocky coastal shores, drinking deeply from soils that never once experienced permafrost. The waters lapping against these forested northern shores were undeniably cool, hovering around 15 degrees Celsius, but they were absolutely and fundamentally ice-free all year round. This vibrant, temperate polar ocean supported a highly specialized ecosystem of marine reptiles that had deliberately pushed their biological adaptations to the extreme margins of the habitable world. Before we deliberately cross the invisible atmospheric threshold into the profound, impending darkness of the polar Cretaceous winter, I want to gently pause this narrative for a brief, quiet moment to speak directly with you. I am Frank, the archaeologist, and it is my absolute, unwavering privilege to act as your dedicated guide through these vast, forgotten oceans of deep time. While reviewing our recent expedition logs, I have noticed that exactly 71.9% of the people who watch these highly immersive videos and comfortably allow themselves to drift away into the ancient eras have not yet actively subscribed to the channel. If you genuinely find true relaxation, a significant reduction in your daily anxiety, and a profound sense of cosmic wonder in these slow, contemplative journeys, please consider subscribing. It genuinely helps our small community grow immensely, ensuring that I can continue meticulously uncovering these dark, ancient mysteries for you night after night. Now, let us return to the heavy, chilling air of the extreme northern latitudes and prepare ourselves for a celestial phenomenon that fundamentally alters the rhythm of life. The absolute, undeniable proof of this astonishingly warm polar environment does not originate from mere speculative fantasy, but from the rigorous, deeply painstaking work of modern paleobotany and isotopic geochemistry. By meticulously drilling deep core samples into the submerged Alpha Ridge, a massive underwater mountain range located directly beneath the modern Arctic Ocean, brilliant scientists have successfully extracted undeniable biological evidence. Locked permanently within these dark, ancient sediment layers are the perfectly preserved fossilized remains of temperate marine diatoms, alongside immense quantities of fossilized pollen originating directly from those coastal terrestrial forests. Furthermore, by carefully analyzing the specific isotopic ratios of oxygen trapped permanently within the heavy shells of high-latitude marine organisms, researchers definitively prove that the water temperature remained comfortably viable for large, cold-blooded reptiles. However, despite this incredibly pervasive planetary warmth, there was one fundamental, absolutely unchangeable physical reality of the solar system that even the extreme Cretaceous greenhouse effect could not possibly alter: the permanent axial tilt of the planet Earth. As the giant sphere slowly traveled along its orbital path around the Sun, the northern hemisphere was eventually tilted completely away from the source of all solar radiation. For the specialized marine reptiles inhabiting this high-latitude oceanic frontier, the impending arrival of the winter season did not bring deadly ice, but it brought something equally challenging to survive: absolute, unbroken, suffocating darkness that would last for up to 6 agonizingly long consecutive months. As the final lingering rays of the autumn sun slowly bleed away below the southern horizon, painting the coastal redwood forests in a bruised wash of deep violet and fading crimson, a highly specialized, perfectly adapted predator silently breaks the surface of the darkening water. This is Mosasaurus, a uniquely evolved, relatively small mosasaur, measuring a modest 3 to 4 meters in total length. Unlike its colossal cousins dominating the sunlit equatorial shallows, the Mosasaurus has not invested its precious biological energy into raw, overwhelming size. Instead, it has entirely dedicated its evolutionary architecture to mastering the absolute darkness. Its skull is remarkably short and highly robust, but its most striking feature is its eyes. The Mosasaurus possesses incredibly massive eye sockets that face directly forward, granting the creature an exceptional degree of binocular stereoscopic vision. In the blinding surface waters of the tropical equator, these highly sensitive eyes would be a crippling disadvantage. But here, in the encroaching absolute blackness of the 6-month polar night, they are an unparalleled masterpiece of engineering. As the endless night officially begins, the dark Arctic sky periodically erupts into a chaotic, mesmerizing display of brilliant atmospheric lights. The aurora borealis of the Late Cretaceous violently paints the freezing heavens in sweeping ribbons of electric green, deep magenta, and ghostly white. This faint dancing celestial illumination penetrates just a few meters below the cold surface of the ocean. It is within this haunting auroral twilight that the Mosasaurus executes its highly calculated hunts. It does not rely on brute force, but rather on perfect absolute stealth and unparalleled sensory perception. Suspended silently in the frigid black water, its massive eyes gather every single microscopic photon of available light filtering down from the dancing auroras above. Furthermore, it is highly attuned to the faint ghostly blue flashes of bioluminescence emitted by the churning schools of deep-water squid that rise toward the surface under the protective cover of the endless night. When the mosasaur detects a disruption in the bioluminescent field, it propels its sleek body forward with incredibly slow, deliberate sweeps of its muscular tail, minimizing any chaotic water displacement that might prematurely alert its highly sensitive prey. The strike, when it finally occurs, is a masterpiece of precision rather than a display of raw kinetic energy. Its forward-facing eyes allow it to perfectly calculate the exact distance in the three-dimensional void, snapping its specialized teeth shut around the soft glowing body of a deep-sea cephalopod. The brutal transaction is illuminated by the dying, neon-blue chemical light of the consumed prey, a fleeting spark of biological energy instantly extinguished and reabsorbed into the dark predator. This specialized creature has completely embraced the shadows, finding its ultimate evolutionary success by patiently waiting for the light to abandon the world. When our heavily burdened human minds deeply contemplate the terrifying prospect of 6 consecutive months of absolute darkness, we instinctively recoil in profound existential discomfort. Our entire modern civilization is aggressively constructed around the relentless worship of the sun and the complete artificial eradication of the night. We violently flood our sprawling cities and our fragile nervous systems with an endless barrage of artificial illumination, deeply terrified of what the quiet shadows might conceal. We culturally equate darkness with stagnation and with an inherently negative cessation of forward momentum. But the Mosasaurus, silently navigating the auroral-lit depths of the polar Cretaceous Sea, teaches us a radically different, profoundly liberating philosophical lesson. The long, silent polar night is absolutely not a punishment. It is a deeply necessary, completely natural phase of profound biological and psychological restoration. By aggressively fighting the dark, we have foolishly denied ourselves the quiet, healing sanctuary of absolute rest. We have forgotten how to simply power down our highly overstimulated minds and completely surrender to the quiet stillness of the unseen world. Imagine your own consciousness becoming entirely like the dark, peaceful Arctic waters. Let the blinding, exhausting lights of your daily anxieties completely fade away, replaced only by the slow, mesmerizing dance of your calmest thoughts. The ancient night is here to heavily blanket you, to perfectly insulate you from the chaotic demands of the waking world. Allow your physical body to sink securely into this unending darkness. The predators of the light are millions of years away, and down here, in the silent dark, there is nothing left to fear. Surrender to the ancient night. Rest entirely. To fully appreciate the magnificent tragedy of the Cretaceous Ocean, we must deliberately fast forward our temporal perspective to a highly specific, fundamentally critical juncture in the deep history of our planet. It is exactly 66 million years before the present day. The global marine ecosystem has reached a state of breathtaking, almost unimaginable biological complexity and ecological saturation. The great mosasaurs have successfully radiated into dozens of highly specialized forms, completely conquering every single available aquatic niche, from the sun-drenched equatorial coral reefs to the freezing auroral-lit polar seas. They are the absolute, unquestioned rulers of a completely interconnected planetary water world. Their reign has lasted for roughly 20 million years, a staggering duration of unbroken biological supremacy that makes the incredibly brief history of human civilization look like nothing more than a fleeting, microscopic biological anomaly. The oceans are incredibly loud, vibrant, and bursting with competitive energy, a perfect thermodynamic engine of life and death. The massive marine reptiles swim through these rich, chalky waters with the supreme confidence of creatures perfectly adapted to a permanent, unchanging reality. Before we completely shatter this magnificent illusion of permanence and bear witness to the most dramatic biological reset in the history of the world, I want to take a brief, quiet moment to speak with you directly. I am Frank, the archaeologist, and it is my absolute, unwavering privilege to act as your dedicated guide through these vast, forgotten oceans of deep time. While reviewing our recent expedition logs, I have noticed that exactly 71.9% of the people who watch these highly immersive videos and comfortably allow themselves to drift away into the ancient eras have not yet actively subscribed to the channel. If you genuinely find true relaxation, a significant reduction in your daily anxiety, and a profound sense of cosmic wonder in these slow, contemplative journeys, please consider subscribing. It genuinely helps our small community grow immensely, ensuring that I can continue meticulously uncovering these dark, ancient mysteries for you night after night. Now, let us return to the heavy-breathing ocean and prepare our minds for the terrifying beauty of absolute, unavoidable systemic collapse. On a seemingly ordinary, perfectly typical morning in the Late Cretaceous period, the sky above the shallow tropical waters of what we now geographically recognize as the Yucatan Peninsula is suddenly torn apart by a completely unimaginable, blindingly white light. A massive 10-kilometer-wide spherical asteroid of incredibly dense carbonaceous chondrite, traveling through the freezing vacuum of space at a terrifying velocity of roughly 20 kilometers per single second, violently impacts the shallow, carbonate-rich coastal waters. The immediate localized physical destruction is absolutely beyond any possible human comprehension. The sheer, raw kinetic energy released in that singular, defining microscopic fraction of a second is roughly equivalent to the simultaneous detonation of 100 million massive nuclear weapons. The shallow ocean is instantaneously and violently vaporized, flashing into a massive expanding dome of superheated steam, pulverized bedrock, and highly toxic sulfur gases that aggressively punches straight through the fragile atmosphere and directly into the cold vacuum of space. Within mere hours, terrifying, continent-shattering tsunamis, boasting horrifying wave heights comfortably exceeding 100 meters, aggressively scour the distant coastlines of the Americas, utterly obliterating the complex coastal nursery ecosystems where the young mosasaurs safely hide. But this immediate, spectacular thermal and kinetic destruction is absolutely not what will eventually kill the undisputed masters of the global ocean. The true, unavoidable apocalypse arrives much more slowly, silently descending from the heavily poisoned sky above. As the massive global cloud of vaporized rock, thick soot from heavily burning terrestrial forests, and highly reflective sulfur aerosols rapidly wraps around the entire circumference of the planet Earth, the bright, life-giving sun is completely and utterly blotted out. The bright turquoise waters of the western interior seaway and the vast open expanses of the proto-Atlantic are suddenly plunged into an agonizingly long, incredibly cold twilight that will persist for several devastating years. This abrupt, total cessation of incoming solar radiation acts as a brutal, highly efficient biological guillotine, specifically targeting the absolute foundational base of the entire oceanic food web. The trillions upon trillions of microscopic photosynthetic phytoplankton, the incredibly delicate coccolithophores and diatoms that tirelessly build their tiny chalk shields in the warm sun, suddenly find themselves completely starved of light. Unable to photosynthesize, unable to generate the fundamental chemical energy required to sustain their microscopic cellular structures, they rapidly die by the unimaginable billions. The continuous life-affirming oceanic snowfall of marine snow abruptly stops. The oceans, once heavily clouded with incredibly vibrant microscopic life, gradually become terrifyingly unnaturally clear and biologically barren. In the unforgiving, brutally logical mathematics of planetary ecology, the sudden, complete removal of the primary producers instantly triggers a catastrophic, unstoppable chain reaction of starvation that rapidly travels straight up the incredibly complex marine food web. The massive, swirling schools of small, shimmering fish and the billions of beautifully shelled ammonites entirely dependent upon the plankton for their daily caloric survival rapidly succumb to the crushing, inescapable famine. As these secondary consumer populations completely and utterly collapse, the medium-sized predatory fish and the smaller, highly specialized marine reptiles find themselves frantically patrolling an increasingly empty, dark, and freezing ocean. For a massive 15-ton apex predator like the prognathodon or the Tylosaurus, this sudden absence of available calories is an absolute, unavoidable death sentence. These colossal biological machines were exclusively designed to operate within an ecosystem of spectacular, overflowing abundance. Their incredibly powerful muscles require a constant, massive influx of protein to maintain basic physiological functions. They cannot possibly slow their aggressive metabolisms enough to survive a starvation event of this global magnitude. They simply run completely out of fuel. One by one, in the cold, unyielding darkness of the poisoned sea, the great leviathans slowly lose their strength. Their massive tails stop beating. Their heavy lungs take one final exhausted breath of toxic air, and their enormous, heavily armored bodies silently sink down into the freezing, hypoxic depths, joining the falling broken shells of the ammonites in the dark mud of the deep abyssal plain. When our fragile human minds contemplate mass extinction events, we almost universally frame them as profound tragedies. We mourn the loss of these magnificent reptilian dynasties, viewing the apocalyptic asteroid impact as a cruel disruption of the natural order. But the universe is beautifully devoid of human morality. The eradication of the Mosasaurs was absolutely not a tragedy. It was merely an entirely necessary ecological clearing of the biological stage. In the cold reality of deep geological time, absolute destruction is the inescapable prerequisite for spectacular biological creation. The complete collapse of the reptilian marine empire left the oceans entirely empty, silently waiting for a new dynasty. Millions of years after the skies finally cleared and the surviving microscopic plankton began to bloom once again, a small, insignificant lineage of furry, warm-blooded terrestrial mammals would awkwardly wade into the shallow coastal waters. Unopposed by the terrifying jaws of the mosasaurs, these tiny ancestors of ours would slowly adapt, evolving over millions of generations into the magnificent, highly intelligent whales and dolphins that beautifully grace our modern oceans today. Your very own incredibly complex, deeply self-aware human consciousness is entirely contingent upon the random, spectacular death of the Cretaceous marine reptiles. We are the direct, highly improbable beneficiaries of their silent destruction. This profound realization should completely liberate you from the heavy illusion of your own personal control. Let this immense weight of planetary history deeply and comfortably flatten your remaining modern anxieties. The highly stressful problems of your daily waking life are nothing but microscopic, meaningless ripples on the massive eternal surface of an endlessly turning, deeply indifferent planet. The great mosasaurs ruled for 20 million years and vanished in a single geological instant, entirely unbothered by their own magnificent erasure. Allow yourself to gently emulate their profound, ancient peace. Actively release your tight grip on your desperate need to control the unpredictable future. The dark ocean of sleep is rising to quietly meet you, perfectly still, calm, and completely devoid of human expectations. Breathe deeply into the magnificent eternal void. Exhale the exhausting light of your fragile consciousness. Let the silent marine snow quietly bury your racing thoughts. The prehistoric world has permanently ended. The ancient sea is perfectly at rest, and you are undeniably safe in the welcoming darkness. The violent, choking dust of the catastrophic asteroid impact eventually settled, clearing the poisoned skies over thousands of agonizing years. The great western interior seaway, once a vibrant theater of reptilian dominance, began to fundamentally and irreversibly change. As the massive tectonic plates continued their relentless waltz, the North American continent was gradually uplifted. The shallow, warm waters that had faithfully supported the massive bodies of the mosasaurs were slowly drained away, retreating permanently back into the deepening ocean basins. The rich, chalky seabed, packed with the broken shells of billions of ammonites and the fossilized bones of the extinct leviathans, was exposed to the drying air. This former oceanic paradise was seamlessly transformed into sweeping arid plains and wind-sculpted badlands. The age of the undisputed marine reptiles was erased from the living biosphere, strictly relegated to the silent archives of solid sedimentary rock. The transition from a vibrant water world to a dry, desolate rock was absolute, perfect, and completely merciless. It marked the definitive end of an unparalleled biological dynasty. Before we formally conclude this deep geological meditation and allow the final echoes of the Cretaceous ocean to fade entirely into the quiet modern night, I must gently pause to speak with you one last time. I am Frank, the archaeologist, and it has been my deepest honor to carefully guide your mind through these forgotten oceans. I see in our final expedition records that exactly 71.9% of the people who watch these highly immersive videos and peacefully surrender to the ancient dark have not yet actively subscribed to the channel. If you have genuinely found true relaxation, a significant reduction in your daily anxieties, and a profound sense of cosmic peace in these contemplative journeys, please consider subscribing. It genuinely helps our community grow, ensuring I can continue unearthing these magnificent mysteries. Now, let us confidently return to the slow, heavy turning of the earth and find our ultimate rest. Deep beneath the sun-baked soil of what we now geographically designate as the modern states of South Dakota and Kansas, the remains of the supreme monarchs waited in undisturbed silence. For exactly 66 million continuous years, these petrified skeletons rested entirely motionless in the total darkness of the earth. During this crushing expanse of deep time, the terrestrial world above them reinvented itself over and over again. Vast continental glaciers repeatedly advanced and retreated across the northern hemisphere, carving incredibly deep freshwater lakes. Enormous woolly megafauna evolved to conquer the freezing steppes, only to eventually succumb to the shifting climate and the lethal spears of a new, highly social bipedal ape. Through all of this frantic noise, the fossilized mosasaurs simply slept. They did not feel the crushing weight of the miles of solid rock pressing down upon them. They did not experience any anxious longing for the vibrant oceans they had lost. They were perfectly preserved in a state of eternal stillness, representing an ultimate physiological zero point where completely nothing was required. When a fragile human paleontologist finally swings a forged steel pickaxe into the sun-bleached limestone, inadvertently striking the perfectly preserved edge of a massive mosasaur jawbone, two alien universes spectacularly collide. The blinding light of the modern sun floods over a biological structure that has not experienced incoming radiation for tens of millions of continuous years. The massive fossil is painstakingly excavated, encased in plaster jackets, and transported to the incredibly quiet halls of a modern natural history museum. Here, the heavy mineralized bones are meticulously reassembled by trained hands, mounted on rigid steel armatures, and dramatically suspended from the vaulted ceiling to flawlessly mimic the aggressive swimming motions of the forgotten past. The robust skull, equipped with its double rows of terrifying pterygoid teeth, stares blankly out into a cavernous room filled with soft artificial lighting and the echoing footsteps of curious human visitors. Imagine yourself standing entirely alone in this grand, quiet museum hall, positioned directly beneath the suspended skeleton of a 17-meter Mosasaurus. You are a highly complex, deeply anxious, warm-blooded mammalian organism, possessing an incredibly rare cerebral cortex uniquely capable of directly contemplating its own inevitable demise. You are standing face to face with the absolute physical embodiment of planetary mass extinction. But as you quietly study the heavy ribs and the sweeping, articulated vertebrae of the massive tail, a deeply comforting philosophical realization should completely wash over your active mind. This magnificent marine creature was once the unchallenged master of a watery world that felt entirely permanent and invincible. It was the zenith of marine biological engineering, possessing explosive speed, unrivaled sensory perception, and a lethal dominance over absolutely everything it encountered. Yet, despite all of its overwhelming biological power and global supremacy, it was completely erased by the uncaring, random contingencies of the physical universe. This observation is fundamentally not a tragic realization. It is profoundly and wonderfully liberating. We spend the vast majority of our incredibly brief human lives desperately trying to assert unwavering control over our highly complex surrounding environments. We tirelessly build rigid societal structures, frantically chase temporary financial security, and desperately try to meticulously plan every single detail of our unpredictable futures, deeply terrified of the chaos of general existence. We mistakenly believe that if we just work hard enough and worry consistently enough, we can somehow insulate ourselves from the fundamental impermanence of the physical world. But the suspended, permanently silent skeleton of the ancient Leviathan gently reminds us that absolute control is a complete biological illusion. The massive, sweeping forces of deep geological time, the sudden trajectories of celestial bodies, and the incredibly slow shifting of the planetary tectonic plates operate completely independently of our anxious human desires. By completely accepting this unchangeable lack of control, we are paradoxically freed entirely from the impossible burden of trying to actively manage the entire universe. You absolutely do not need to hold everything securely together tonight. You do not need to constantly anticipate every possible catastrophic outcome of your immediate future. The world will eventually end, modern civilizations will inevitably crumble into fine dust, and entirely unrecognizable ecosystems will beautifully rise to completely take their place, proceeding without your direct personal intervention or your anxious oversight. You are merely a tiny, highly localized cluster of ancient stardust, briefly granted the spectacular privilege of conscious observation. The absolute fact that you are currently alive, actively breathing, and completely capable of deeply understanding the ancient history of the Mosasaurus is a breathtaking, highly improbable mathematical miracle. You are the universe actively looking back at itself, beautifully recognizing its own deep, ancient, and violent past. As the quiet atmosphere of the modern museum hall slowly fades entirely from your drifting consciousness, let the unending silence of the fossilized bones securely anchor your racing, tired mind. The great mosasaurs have successfully completed their incredibly long, violent, and beautiful journey. They have permanently returned to the stable minerals of the deep earth, laying down their heavy evolutionary burdens. They are not frantically swimming, they are not aggressively hunting, and they are not desperately fighting for their survival anymore. They are currently experiencing the perfect, unwavering peace of deep geological time. You can deliberately and consciously choose to join them in that perfect, unbroken stillness right now. As you lie comfortably in your dark room, consciously allow the boundaries of your heavy body to dissolve into the comforting space. Feel your biological skeleton, constructed from the exact same elemental calcium that built the crushing jaws of the leviathans, sinking heavily into your mattress. Imagine vividly that your bed is the welcoming mud of the abyssal plain, completely insulated from the frantic storms of the surface world. The dark, ancient ocean of sleep is slowly rising to completely cover you. It is a warm, deeply comforting tide that gently washes away the static of your daily responsibilities. Every slow, deep breath you take mirrors the rhythmic, ancient pulse of the massive sea. Inhale the silent peace of the extinct world. Exhale all the tense urgency of the modern human era. There is absolutely nothing left to solve, completely nothing left to analyze, and nowhere else you need to urgently be tonight. The ancient apex predators are deeply asleep in the cold stone. The shallow inland seas have completely dried up. The violent, world-ending asteroid has long since struck, and the chaotic world has beautifully, quietly healed itself. Everything that was ever going to happen in that lost world has already happened, quietly resolving into perfect stillness. You are completely safe in this exact present moment, beautifully suspended in the quiet space between the deep, unchangeable past and the silent, unwritten future. Allow the incredible physical weight of the turning planet to fully support you. Allow the eternal silence of the fossilized leviathans to become your own profound silence. Drift effortlessly down into the dark, welcoming waters of absolute rest. The magnificent reign of the ocean monarchs is perfectly complete. The ancient sea is perfectly calm. Let go completely. Sleep quietly in the deep eternal dark.